Make sure you guys hit the subscribe button if you guys are enjoying the content that we're throwing up. And make sure you guys hit the like button if you enjoy the video. And yeah, let's begin. What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and we are covering Tales from the Dark Multiverse. It's kind of surprising that DC is still releasing these, but at the same time, I'm kind of not surprised because they were just so freaking cool. And it kind of sucked that DC stopped doing it for a time, you know, but this is a cool one. The next one we get after this is actually Flashpoint, so I'm really excited to see what this has in store. Now, for those of you guys who are not familiar with Tales from the Dark Multiverse, a lot of you guys are familiar with like the Dark Knight's Metal event, right? The idea that you have the multiverse in DC Comics, and then on the opposite side, you have the Dark Multiverse, which is basically worlds that are not supposed to exist, worlds that are born from like nightmares and things like that. And so Tales of the Dark Multiverse was designed to build on that, and it was designed to basically give us stories involving versions of Batman from the Dark Multiverse, just these really terrible and twisted versions of his character. And so what this does is this initially starts out by kind of giving us the typical origin of Batman, the way that we normally expect, right? In the sense that you've got Bruce Wayne, who's alongside his parents, Thomas and Martha, after seeing the Mask of Zorro. In the process, they're basically, his parents are shot to death in Crime Alley by Joe Chill, and then Bruce Wayne basically goes on to travel the world, learn all kinds of different skills, and then come back to Gotham as Batman. That's the way it normally works. The way this works is that it wasn't just Bruce, Thomas, and Martha, it was also Thomas Elliott and his parents. Now, for those of you guys who don't know who Thomas Elliott is, Thomas Elliott made his debut in a story that was really, really awesome called Batman Hush. But this was basically a story where Hush popped up out of nowhere and essentially just like turned all of Batman's villains, or really kind of took all his villains and pit him against Batman and even some of his allies, right? And it was cool stuff. Like Superman falls under the control of Poison Ivy. It's just these amazing ways of just kind of moving characters around in a way that you don't normally see. And it was literally Batman just running the gauntlet. It was nuts. It's an amazing story. I think it's like 12 issues long or something like that. And so what this does is it basically tells us that in the aftermath of Bruce Wayne's parents dying, that the Elliots were the one who took in Bruce instead of Alfred. And that as time went on, Bruce became more and more disconnected and fell deeper and deeper into madness, right? Basically began to kind of lose his mind. And so the result of this is that we end up picking up some years later, and Gotham City is wholly different now. Instead of Gotham City being one of the many cities among the United States, it's now a city-state. It's independent of the United States. Gotham has its own president. It's got its own defense contractors. It really is its own country. And you have people who play different roles here, right? The person who's in charge of Gotham's defense contracting is Jason Todd. The Attorney General of Gotham is Harvey Dent. You know, the founding families, the entrepreneur and the philanthropist, the kind of big-time financial guy outside of, the one who runs Wayne Enterprises is Oswald Cobblepot. But really Gotham's first family, the richest individuals in Gotham, are essentially Thomas Elliott and Talia al Ghul. Now, there's a little bit of importance that I kind of want to impress upon you guys here. Talia al Ghul, as you guys know, is the biological mother of Damian Wayne. And in the main DC universe, it was Talia and Bruce who ended up having Damian, right? Now, the means by which Damian was conceived are questionable at best. But the idea behind this is that Talia basically procreated with Bruce. In this instance, she's with Thomas Elliott. Now, the motivation behind that will actually become a little more apparent as time goes on in terms of why she's here. But it's one of these interesting things where essentially Thomas Elliott is the one who's basically running Wayne Enterprises. Wayne Enterprises effectively fell to him. Now, how that happened, we'll find out here in a second. But the funny thing about this is that the reason why Talia is currently with Thomas Elliott is because she's still the one who runs the League of Assassins. That hasn't really changed. She killed her father, took his place, and she's the one who runs the show. But the League of Assassins serves as a means by which Thomas Elliott became a senator, right? So using power, using information, probably money, different things like that, they ended up securing his place as a senator. Now, we also end up getting is that we're initially, our first inclination here is to like the wealthy and the powerful of Gotham. We end up finding out that things are a lot more dire than they initially appear. What you have here is very much a kind of czarist society, right? A Bolshevik Revolution type of society, in the sense that when you had the Bolshevik Revolution in the early 1900s in Russia, what you had was extreme social inequality, right? So you had the super wealthy in the form of the Tsar family and those individuals they consorted with, and then you had basically everybody else, right, who was living in destitution and squalor. And that's why the Bolshevik Revolution happened, is because you basically had people who had just had enough, and they revolted against the Tsars. They killed the entire Tsar family, including Anastasia, and then of course we ended up getting vanguard communism, which is a form of communism that never works. But the idea behind this is that you basically have this extreme inequality. duality. So you have individuals who are revolting against the government, and then you have the government itself, which is kind of putting out this illusion to the general public, everything's fine, and look at how great the upper class is doing, and so on and so forth. And so from there, we basically follow Elliott when he was called away, and we pick up with Dr. Crane, right? Now, Dr. Crane is normally Scarecrow, but this guy's here within Arkham Asylum. And the idea behind this is that within Arkham, most of the traditional criminals that we're familiar with have largely just kind of been locked away, becoming the characters that we know. For example, Jarvis Tetch is not actually the Mad Hatter. Instead, he's just a crazy guy in a cell who sings these songs about the devil of Arkham, right? This kind of rumor or this story about how there was at one point in time a force that just kind of moved around Arkham Asylum. At least it was put forward by Amadeus Arkham, right? The guy who originally ran and established the asylum itself, that it was just kind of this ghostly apparition that would move between the walls and that kind of a thing, right? You know, it's kind of creepy in the way that it's done. But the reason why Thomas Elliott's been called here is because Bruce Wayne has died, and he's only the most recent in a series of deaths that have happened within Arkham. And for the most part, it's just kind of being swept under the rug. They can kind of be explained away, but in this instance, it can't, right? The indication here is that Bruce Wayne basically rolled over on his pillow and suffocated himself, right? Which is a little weird, but he's got the you know, autopsy scars and all that kind of stuff, and it's a little crazy, right? Because Bruce Wayne is just officially dead. And so what you end up getting here is this arrangement that seems to have happened where you essentially had Dr. Crane working alongside Thomas Elliott to kind of keep Bruce Wayne in a vegetative state. That Bruce Wayne had basically been essentially, you know, a vegetable for quite some time. Now, it's not really said explicitly on the nose, like, hey, reader, I helped Thomas Elliott keep Bruce Wayne in a vegetative state so that Thomas Elliott could take over the Wayne fortune and keep it, right? Because if Bruce Wayne just woke up and word got out, you know, even if it somehow managed to leak out that Bruce Wayne is within Arkham Asylum and he's lucid, then people would be like, what's going on here? They would start asking questions, right? And it would lead to a great big huge debacle. And so keeping him off the grid basically kept things silent. The other part of this, though, is that within the hand of Bruce Wayne is a ticket to the Mark of Zorro. And that's why things are a little wonky here, because it's kind of like we've never really seen this before. Now, following that, you end up having Dr. Crane as he leaves and basically comes across the groundsman, who's largely alluded to be the Joker. But then suddenly the lights kick off. And that's when you end up having this kind of you know, this rhyme that's being given by Jarvis Tetch, which he kind of continues on in the darkness. And where the janitor is kind of like, okay, you know, the lights will kick back on here in a second. You know, it's cool. It happens sometimes. It's super late. We get these rolling power outages. It's not really that uncommon that the emergency lights kick on, and like this just horrifying looking Batman Visage that looks like Hush if he became Batman just comes flying onto Dr. Crane and just seems to kill the guy. It's kind of nuts. Following that, like, Thomas Elliott bails, right? He ends up getting out of there and getting on this helicopter and flying back to what looks to be his penthouse apartment, that you have this Batman figure just perched, kind of looking at him. When that happens, a rocket shoots out of nowhere and takes a helicopter down. And when the helicopter crashes and lands, you end up finding out that it kind of lands among, you know, you have all these rebels and so on and so forth. But the rebels are basically led by Barbara Gordon. And the reason why is because in the rise to Gotham becoming a city-state, that her father, Jim Gordon, was killed in the process. Now, again, we're not given a whole lot of indication here. If we just sort of use a little bit of a combination of common sense and a little bit of just kind of guesswork, we can largely assume that Gotham was any city just like any other, and that something seems to have happened. Gotham basically decided to become an independent city-state. Somehow it was allowed, and that in turn led to Commissioner Gordon, possibly a handful of others, becoming part of a resistance movement. And in that process, Jim Gordon was killed. Barbara took up the mantle in his stead and has basically been fighting ever since. And so when that happens, of course, you end up having what's more or less the Gotham City military come descending on, right? They kind of come descending on this thing, but you also end up having Tim Drake, who's here, along with Cassandra Cain, that these guys are more or less unified, absent the idea of Batman, right? But they're still there and they still work as a singular group. In the process, you know, with the helicopter crash landing, you get Cassandra Cain, you get Tim Drake, who basically show up here, and then they're met by the arrival of one of the Gray Sons. And the Gray Son is Dick Grayson. Now, it's kind of weird here because Gray Son, there's actually a really cool concept to this character that we'll talk about here in a second, but this guy lays waste to Tim Drake and Cassandra Cain. I mean, overcomes them like that. It's not even a fight. It's not even a contest. And he asked Tim Drake, like, do you really want to do this fight right now? Because if we do, you're going to die. And Tim Drake is like, we'll fight, but not today. And he basically ends up leaving. Now, we end up finding out that Gray Son and really the Gray Sons themselves seem to work, or at least are heavily involved directly with the president of Gotham, President Lincoln March, which is a really interesting concept given the New 52 Batman run. The cool thing is that with the Gray Son being here, he's basically told, like, I was sent here directly from the president because we need to keep an eye on you, right? we need to keep an eye on Gotham. We have to keep all this stuff under control. And it's one of the interesting things here, because it's not the first time this has happened, that other individuals out there, right? Like Attorney General Harvey Dent was attacked, basically the Gotham City Security Force, right? So like their paramilitary group, Captain Flash, the one who runs it, is missing as well. There were these clippings about the old Wayne murders that were found alongside these individuals, or at least, I'm sorry, in a place where these individuals were when they went missing. And so there's a kind of huge mystery going on here. And that's why Thomas Elliott was secured by Grayson, because it's kind of like the powerful of Gotham are vanishing. We're here to grab you to make sure that doesn't happen to you. Now, from there, they end up, of course, capturing Barbara Gordon. And when Grayson starts interrogating her, it's this interesting thing where you kind of find out that, hey, like her people did not bring down the airship. They don't really know who did. But then Grayson basically drops the idea of like these powerful people are missing, these news clippings are there. And then she's like, oh, it's the Wayne murders that are the reason why those guys are going missing. Okay, well, it's starting to make a lot more sense. Then I'm going to give you an easy clue here, right? And this will put you back on the path of actually finding out what's going on. What she tells him is that the airship of Thomas Elliott was most likely shot down by LexCorp's surface-to-air RIM-72 Raptor missile, and you cannot access those in the United States. Instead, the only way to get those is outside of the US, and the idea is that you can only find them in Santa Prisca, and that several containers of quote-unquote structure-grade lumber from Santa Prisca arrived in Gotham Harbor last week, and the person who received those is the defense contractor of Gotham. It's Jason Todd. And so she basically points to the finger and says, we don't know who shot you down, but it looks like it was probably Jason Todd. So you may want to go and investigate him. And then she's like, as far as this assassination attempt that was made on your life, I wouldn't really worry about that, because what it looks like is you've got much, much bigger problems. Now, what we end up doing is transitioning to Old Town in Gotham City. And Old Town is basically the base of operations for where Jason Todd operates as the defense contractor. Of course, some pretty heavy hitters, some big henchmen. And when they get in there, the immediate question, the immediate interrogation from Grayson is, what's going on here? Why is it that you're receiving missiles and so on and so forth? And where you initially have Jason Todd, who's like, I don't really know what you're talking about. I have no idea what's going on. Grayson basically says like, well, we could say Dick Grayson basically says, look, I've got my drones that are going through here, and they're scanning your entire facility, right? And they found 12 LexCorp ordnance containers containing these missiles, and one of the missiles are gone, right? So by all standards of measurement, this missile came from your facility, and it was used to try to shoot down a sitting senator. Spill the beans on what's going on, right? And literally like targets his drones on him with the intention of killing him. Following that, you end up having all these forces that start showing up, and they're actually members of the League of Assassins, which are led by Talia al Ghul. And that's when Jason Todd starts to spill the beans and saying, sorry, man, it's the end of the road for you, right? Like the Owls have had their time, right? So this points to the idea that Dick Grayson is actually part of the Court of Owls. Now the Court of Owls have moved beyond Gotham City, and moved up in Gotham City, and are effectively seem to be the ones running the show here, or at the very least, are heavily involved in President Lincoln March, which kind of makes sense given his involvement with the Court of Owls in the events of New 52. But with the Court of Owls having long been the secretive organization that worked within Gotham City itself, that kind of concept still continues on. And so Jason Todd is kind of like, this is the end of the road, man. Well, then suddenly out of nowhere, a grenade comes flying in, right? And like the whole place starts to burn. And when that happens, like you've got Thomas Elliott and you've got Dick Grayson, who basically get out of there as fast as they can when the Batman comes pouring in and starts tearing into everybody. Now, for his part, Dick Grayson fights against Batman as best he can, but he's not much of a competitor here, right? And so of course he basically ends up escaping. You've got Batman, who immediately goes after Jason Todd. And Jason Todd, here's the thing, man, Jason Todd goes down like a hero. And not even really like a hero, he just goes down like the most awesome way ever. He's like, do you really think I'll go down easy? He's like, come on then, right? He's like, come on, big boy, let's dance. And then just starts shooting, right? It's the craziest thing. It's the coolest thing. Well, following that revelation from Jason Todd, Thomas Elliott ends up inside Wayne Manor, goes running up on Talia, and he's like, what's going on here, right? Like, she's like, where have you been? I have no idea what you're talking about. He's like, I just got done talking with Jason Todd when all hell broke loose, and he told me that the League of Assassins is gonna take me out, and they're led by you, and he did it with your blessing, so the two of you are working together to oust me. So what in the heck is going on here? And her response is, the League of Assassins did not have any attempt on your life, but do not misunderstand your place in the bigger picture, Thomas Elliott. We put you where you are, and we have plans for you. We would like to put you in the position of president of Gotham, but we also recognize that you could be killed at any point in time. And so we've got backup plans for our backup plans, and we needed Jason Todd's resources, right? It just happened to be that Jason Todd decided to make that move against you right then because he has his own ambitions, and that kind of a thing. It's kind of crazy because the response of Thomas Elliott is, if you want to maintain access to my multi-billion multi-billion-dollar company, then you would do well to keep me alive. Well, in saying that, he suddenly looks on his desk and realizes there's a comic for the Mark of Zorro. And he's like, where did you get this? And that's when he starts freaking out. Talia has no idea what he's talking about, right? She doesn't know anything about this Batman type character. She thinks he's losing his mind. And he's like, this Batman's guy's been in this house, right? He's been in this house before. This all started in one place. I'm going back there and we're going to finally get answers, right? So he ends up going back to what's basically Wayne Manor, the original Wayne Manor house. And when he gets in there, he starts asking the question like, who are you? Why are you doing all this? And he's met by this voice. And this voice says, is there something I should know about the Wayne murders? And that's when we end up finding out that Dick Grayson's here. And the reason why he's here is because he tracked down Thomas Elliott. That he's got a bug on Thomas Elliott so he can overhear what he says. And he's got a tracker so he can always know where his movements are. And given the conversation he had with Talia and given his movements, it was only a matter of logic that he would end up here. Not only that where Dick Grayson is the head of President March's security, that what you end up finding out is that President March and those guys had long believed for quite some time that the League of Assassins working alongside Thomas Elliott intended to move him above his station and replace President Lincoln March. And so it was kind of like, we suspected that for a long time. And now you have basically confirmed it through your conversations with Talia that you plan on ousting the president and taking his place. Well, in the middle of all that, the floor comes crashing down, right? Literally, they get yanked through the floor. And when they basically begin to come to, the Thomas Elliott looks around and sees Alfred. And he's singing this really creepy nursery rhyme. Hush, little babe, lest you call down the bloody bat of Gotham town. He lurks above, desiring of a corpse to plant beneath the ground. He knows your heart, your blackest deed, and follows them wherever they lead. Where you go, the bat will know and find you with the devil's speed. It's a really cool rhyme. Like, I love that rhyme, right? And Thomas Elliott does not immediately recognize Alfred. And this really kind of shows the fact that Thomas didn't have a whole lot of involvement with Alfred, and Alfred has largely been absent in the years since Thomas took over Wayne Enterprises, all that kind of stuff. And so what you end up having happen is that Alfred basically tells Thomas it was a mistake coming here, right? It was a terrible mistake. And when the lights kick on, there's this holding cell that's here that looks like it's intended for whoever the next victim is, seemingly Thomas himself. And then you've also got like all these other individuals who are currently being held here. Jason Todd's being held here. All these folks, right? Like Dr. Crane is being held here. And that's when the bat starts to pop up, because Thomas asked the question like, Alfred, did you do all this? And the response of Alfred is, no, I'm just a humble manservant. I serve the Waynes, nothing more. And then he says, the Waynes are dead, Alfred. And the response of Alfred is, are they, Master Thomas? Are they really dead indeed? And then you end up having this Batman who shows up here, right? Now, Batman literally goes after Thomas and says like, I know what you did, Tommy, right? All those years ago, your family driver, what you promised him to kill your own parents, and how it all went wrong. Who else? And when Thomas like, who are you? He's like, who else would I be? Everyone's dead but us. The Waynes are dead in that alley. The Elliots were killed on the road a few years later. The driver was killed in a cell awaiting trial for another crime. Even the decent cop who took the call, Jim Gordon, is dead. And he says, when your parents took me in, your mother said the boys will finally get to be real brothers. How Dr. Crane laughed when I told him that story. The idea that I was ever like a brother to you who took every single thing from me. This is Bruce Wayne, right? Like, Thomas has worked against Bruce from the beginning, right? That Thomas seemed to have wanted to take his parents out and then to take out the parents of Bruce and take over the Wayne fortune for himself. And the response of Thomas is, you're dead. I saw you die. You were on the operating table. You had an autopsy done on you. You had the autopsy scars. And that's when he says, no, this was all planned from the very beginning. You were not the only visitor in Arkham, Tommy, right? Alfred was always with me. And he says, so was the handyman that we planted at Arkham, Jack Napier. This is the guy who gave me the surgical scars that made it look like I had an autopsy, right? So I could basically fake my death and escape that place. He gave me the drugs so I could look like I died. He says, with Alfred's help, I learned what happened to my parents years ago, and Napier got me access to people in Arkham who could help me avenge them. All these individuals who were held within Arkham Asylum. Amadeus Arkham himself, who taught criminal psychology, the disgraced spy, Nick Mason, who taught him disguise, lockpicking, all things spycraft. All these individuals played a role in Bruce Wayne becoming who he was, becoming this version of Batman that's dark and twisted and knowing how to kill people with surgical precision and disappear without ever being caught. And so you initially have Thomas who begs, right? He's like, no, you misunderstand, right? We're brothers, man. And together we can fix everything. We can fix Gotham. We can make it a better place, man. We can make it better than what it used to be. And the response is, no, that's not going to happen. You're never going to see the light of day again, right? This is it. You're finished. And so from there, you switch back over to kind of like like the Gotham state media, right? Which is kind of going through and saying, hey, like, here's everything that's going on, and that with the vanishing of Thomas Elliott, the Wayne fortune is passed on to Alfred Pennyworth, who was the family butler, but nobody's seen him in years. So we have no idea where this billionaire is or what it is that he has going on. That Talia al Ghul is now on the arm of President Lincoln March, right? She's with him now. Many of us thought Talia would seek out the affections of Jason Todd, but he's gone. And it seems like it's pretty fast, right? She just immediately jumped after the vanishing of Thomas Elliott directly into the arms of Lincoln March, right? So hypergamy. And it's just kind of like, this is pretty wild, right? Like, it's pretty crazy stuff. It's interesting because what you end up finding out here is the handyman is the one who basically kind of guards all these cells. So basically the Joker of sorts, that Alfred is just kind of there, keeping the place cleaned up as trashed as it is. And that basically Batman the Silenced, which is what he's called now, is traveling throughout Gotham and killing all the higher powered guys, all the folks who are running the show and who are completely and totally corrupted. What the end goal is, we have no clue. We have no clue if he wants to just distill madness throughout the entirety of the city. But whatever it is, this is in effect a version of Bruce Wayne who's experienced torment, who was broken by madness, who completely and totally lost his mind in the face of the fact that he had completely lost everything. With that being said, we're going to bring this video to an end. If you guys are new here to Comics Explained, make sure you guys hit the sub button to become part of the Rob Corps. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you drop a like, and I will catch you all later. Peace.